Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. Energy UK tells me this is a record-breaking event, so obviously there's a lot of interest in more of a grounded conversation on AI. Some housekeeping first. If the fire alarm does go off, then we're not expecting a test, so please leave. And if you're online, that probably applies to you too. But not our fire alarm, but yours. So why are we here today? Well, I don't know about you, but the last year in the energy industry, the conversation on AI to me has felt a little bit like this. AI powered. And then you look at it and often it's technology we've been using for years. Bold claims like AI will deliver efficiency, where that's often not where I'd start. Or my favorite, the agentic AI energy mesh, which I can hardly even say without, with a straight face, when we've got real problems to solve right now. I think we know there's something valuable here, but I think we know this isn't the way to get it, and often it feels a little bit like this. AI is the answer. Now, what was the question? And I say this as a software engineer, to me this is totally backwards, and yet it's a pattern we see repeating in this industry over and over again. A new technology comes out, people get really excited about it, they start applying it everywhere that they possibly can, and then it hits marketing departments, and it's just game over. Sam Young is here from Energy Systems Gaspot today to help us flip this question the right way around and focus on the business problem first. And he's done a lot of awesome work in that space that he'll share you a snippet of to make sure that you can learn from those real experiences to make better decisions. I think there's a second challenge that we often see, and that is, what do we mean by AI? It's become this sort of catch-all term that means everything to all things all at once. And I'm not saying this is a perfect categorization, but it is a useful one to split down to a first level of these three things. We've got machine learning, learning patterns from data to predict a future outcome. And most often there we're talking about numbers, and hey, we're in the energy industry, right? It's engineering, it's voltage, it's often numbers. But that's been in production use for over 10 years now. But it's generative AI that's hit the scene in the last few years that results in some of that confusion. And generative AI is the domain where we're looking at learning patterns from data to generate new content. And most often there, we're talking about language and large language models. Finally, the one that people love to get stir crazy about, the evolution from generative AI, is agentic AI. A large language model agent using tools, for example, internet search or integration with your email, in a loop to achieve a goal. And we've seen a lot of change there last year as a result of the advent of MCP servers. And most often with agentic AI, we're talking about automation. But software development to a large degree has always been about automation. It's just a new form, but that doesn't mean there isn't an exciting future here of things that we can't yet see. I think it's important to make the distinctions at this level. So the panel today has a bit of a starting rubric of starting to refer to which area, domain we're talking about in terms of technique. Because when you're talking about these different areas, you have different data needs, different trade-offs, different risks, different ways you deploy them effectively. Ultimately, you make different decisions depending on the technique being used. And I'm really excited to have Jamie here today from UK Power Networks. And Jamie, I know you work with data and models and machine learning predominantly, and that's why I think it's really cool that today you're going to talk about an underappreciated part of the impact of AI, which is how its generative AI and agentic AI is impacting the software development process and craft. A third challenge we see is, if we've agreed that part of the answer may be AI for a specific situation, then it comes to the question, can we deploy it at scale? A model can make a perfect prediction, but does it change a human behavior? Does it change a business outcome? That's often where I see organizations struggle. It's not in the use cases or the experimentation part, it's at the deploying at scale part with trust, with reliability. And something that starts off as a technology problem evolves as a technology problem. It becomes different concerns like infrastructure. But it also becomes a technology problem and a governance problem in terms of accountability, and a human problem in terms of adoption, and a business problem in terms of cost control and value. So also really excited to have Ruby from Kraken here today, who has huge amounts of experience thinking about all the different facets of what AI adoption requires, although I think you've got a different word than adoption for it. And that'll hopefully help you decide how you can deploy and adopt AI at scale. So the goal here is to have these different panelists represent and challenge. We'll start with these 3 challenges, but we'll also have some questions. To bring that all together, we'll have Daisy introducing us. So Daisy is from Energy UK and looks after AI at Energy UK, as well as future energy retail markets. And so she'll help us set the big policy picture before we have some quick lightning talks from each of the 3 people I've just introduced there. I'll chair the panel, so at some point I should probably say who I am. I'm Marcus Gardner. I'm the Director of Energy and Utilities at Softwire. So in my day job, I work with power networks and traders, and so I'll look to bring my own stories about data and AI as well. But as this slide says, the goal here is not a panel of ideas. It's about sharing some real stories so we can inform some better decisions to get some better outcomes here. So I'll be challenging all of you at the front, the panelists, to keep it grounded, keep it specific, and welcome some tension if we disagree on a few things as well. Hopefully that's a helpful framing, and Daisy, I'll hand off to you first.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. Am I standing in the right spot?
I think we're good. I'm just far enough away from you now.
Okay. So yeah, I'm Daisy, and I head up the AI workstream at Energy UK under the future retail side of things. And oh, sorry, I've got to flip my slide on. And yeah, anyone that's ever worked with me will know I'm not a technologist. I'm very much broad brushstrokes kind of person. So I work within the policy team at Energy UK. And AI is a relatively new work stream for us, and we've been sort of spending the last couple of years building our knowledge and understanding of what our members want to see on AI. So our work stream covers the whole energy industry through our membership. So not just suppliers, not just technologists, but every part of the energy system. So I guess the main thing to say is we in government see AI as a massive opportunity. It's a massive potential stimulus for growth, and don't want to miss out on the opportunities that AI could have. So, for example, on sort of grid efficiency, costs, the customer experience, which we'll hear about more in a minute, and that means really we need to sort of hold ourselves and each other to account on this. So our role with membership is supporting members and government by identifying risks and opportunities for the sector and its customers, and whether there are any barriers we need to address to avoid slowing down progress. And the good news is government is supportive, and we were actually the first country to have a national AI strategy, so that's a good start. So in terms of approach to regulation, we welcome the pro-innovation approach that government and Ofgem has been taking to date, and they seem very keen to collaborate with industry, which is really positive. It's important to keep in mind that the likelihood and severity of different AI risks will be different, and so regulation and guidance coming from Ofgem and the regulator needs to take that into account. We don't want it to stifle innovation and growth, but we do obviously need to make sure the right protections are in place for customers and end users. So, for example, classical predictive AI systems tend to be more transparent and predictable than agentic AI models, so they might require less intensive oversight. And as Marcus was saying earlier, AI isn't new, and the risks aren't really that new from what we've been hearing. So the system's in place, we've been using AI, but the only thing that might happen is it could magnify existing risks. So we need to keep an eye on that, because if it optimizes the good guys' work, it could also help the bad guys optimize their work too. So regardless of the type of AI used, suppliers and other parties must have good oversight and strategies in place to make sure they're monitoring what's going on. But there is also a massive commercial incentive to be good at this, because it is a competitive differentiator. So if you can think about companies that use AI really well, and what the risks could be to their businesses of getting that wrong. In terms of barriers to adoption, data accessibility and quality is a barrier, I think, just generally in the energy sector, but that obviously flows through to the AI side of things. So AI is really only as good as the data you put into it and can access. So in the energy sector, as many of you will know, there's lots of different data sets which are siloed or incomplete due to GDPR, commercial sensitivity or regional inconsistencies. There are some projects underway already to address some of those issues. So there's the Elexon Data Repository, Smart Data Energy Scheme, SSES consent solution. But we need to sort of keep a good focus on that side of things as well. Another barrier is potentially around skills. So I was at a ministerial roundtable a couple of weeks ago with DSIT, and there was a bit of disagreement on the extent to which the skills are there already. But it feels like people generally thought that the skills are there at sort of strategic senior level, and less so at like the fluency of at the operational level. So that's something that we're keen for government to take a look at. And then we've also got a work stream which is separate on the demand side. So that's around supporting development around data centre siting and power. But on that side of things, it feels like policies in GB is behind other markets. So those markets are requiring data centres to contribute to efficient system operation as part of the connection and planning approval, which we don't do. And it's obviously an impact because you need sort of energy and water for cooling to power data centres, so we need to put them in the right place. And I think a lack of a clear strategy to do that is going to mean that we can't compete globally. So to summarise, to make the most of the opportunity, we need to create the right conditions to allow innovation to flourish, including a consistent, clear policy direction across all regulators, government departments, and a proportionate risk-based level of oversight. And government should make sure it supports data sharing and skills initiatives as a priority. So I'm going to hand over to Sam now from Energy Systems Catapult.
Thanks, Daisy. How do you choose which problems to apply AI to? That's a really challenging thing, and particularly when what you're looking for is huge impact at scale across a sector. At Energy Systems Catapult, our focus is really how do we accelerate innovators to have huge impact on the UK energy system. And so my job as the AI practice manager is to really help steer people, help think about where should we be applying AI. So I'm going to let you in on my framework for thinking about this. The first, we have lots of people start by going, how can we automate processes? And that's great and can be really valuable, but people often start with incremental cost reduction. So how can we automate this bit of the process that will slightly reduce our costs? There's a big cost focus in the sector. Actually, the things that are holding us back as a sector from really delivering at the pace that we need, well, that's actually skilled resource. Like, who has too many power systems engineers in their organization? No one, right? Everyone needs more power systems engineers. So the place we should be looking is how do we use AI to enable power systems engineers to be twice as effective? The other classic digitalization element is focus not just on where there's kind of incremental cost reduction, but where does using AI completely transform the speed at which something can happen or the scale at which something can happen. Because that's where you can completely transform the process as a whole rather than just kind of getting a little bit of efficiency. Another area that AI is really useful for is managing complexity at scale. So the energy system is getting more and more complex as we have more and more participants in it. And there's two angles to this. One is how do you distill all of that complex information down into decisions for people? And so that can be at a national level in the control room. How do you synthesize all of those alarms down to the priority ones for the operators? Or at the consumer level, how do you simplify the operation of a heat pump into a, I just want to set my temperature and schedule, please? But there are some areas where AI really is about humans. It's not just presenting humans with the decision, but there are actual kind of optimization, exploring the landscape of options that humans aren't going to be able to compare all of those different dimensions. And that's an area we often confuse those two things, but we need to make sure that we do both. What we see, and what I'm sure is a theme that's going to come up in the panel, is people applying AI to problems that don't matter. If you solved this problem with AI, would anything change? No? Then don't solve the problem with AI, even if you can. And then predicting tomorrow. So we get lots of people excited about the thing at the bottom, predicting the long-term future. Can we use AI to predict what the world's going to be like in 10 years' time? Well, actually, a lot of the things that you need when you're exploring the long-term future are the transparency of assumptions and understanding how they interact, and you want to have that transparency. AI doesn't necessarily help you with that all of the time. Sometimes it makes it harder to understand the transparency, harder to understand the assumptions. Where it is really good is the short-term future, because the next few days are going to be pretty similar to the last few days, and extrapolating the patterns from recent history into the near future is quite an application that AI is quite reliable for. So what does it really look like to do this in a way that is really transformative? My favorite example at the moment is HeatGeek's Zero Disrupt product. Now, the reason that this is so good is because HeatGeek went, what's the challenge? The real challenge in the sector in accelerating heat pump adoption is the installers having the confidence and the speed to get installations faster, cheaper, and more reliable. And so what they did was they didn't just apply an AI tool, but they broke the process down, applied AI in lots of different places, and that is having a dramatic impact on the installation time and the cost, to the extent that I had an installation of a heat pump last week. I was chatting to the installer who hadn't used Zero Disrupt, and he was saying to me, Zero Disrupt is really good because it tells me the stuff that I don't need to bother with, all of those bits. It's got AI in it, and he made a face. He didn't like the fact that it had AI in it, but he liked the outcomes that it was driving for him. And that's a great example of where, hey, it's solving a real problem, so people care about it. If you're interested in looking for more problems that are high impact, one of the pieces of work that we've done is as part of the AI for Decarbonisation Virtual Centre of Excellence advice programme. We've created some decarbonisation challenge cards to show where AI can be employed, and we've looked at what has the progress on applying AI to decarbonisation been over the last 12 months. So if you're interested in that, come talk to me or have a look at those. And I'd now like to hand over to Ruby, who's going to tell us about AI at Kraken.
Thanks so much, Sam. So my role at Kraken is to drive the internal initiatives around AI. So I've really been focusing on adoption and enablement of the organisation, thinking about individual use, and then also thinking about what products we want to build for the organisation. So when I joined this role about a year ago, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. AI felt really quite new. It felt like something that only early adopters were really using, and we didn't really have any guidelines of how to use AI tools or what we might need as an organisation. So the first thing we did is set out, okay, what are the principles that can at least guide us whilst we figure all of this stuff out? So first one, AI is an amplifier, not a replacement. This was really fundamental for a lot of the negative sentiment that we were experiencing in the company, a lot of fear around, and also in the market and media, a lot of hype about and excitement around AI being a replacement for humans. And I really wanted to make it clear that's not what we're trying to do here at Kraken. We'll only use AI where it's valuable. Now, we didn't know what the answer to that was at the time. We've now figured it out, and I'll get into that a little bit more on the panel and later on. Everyone's accountable for what they put out in the world. Be really proud of what you put out, and it's your work and it's still a reflection on you even if you didn't write it. And then being curious and open-minded. This again was trying to lean into the sentiment element, right? Like, even if you have big opinions, at least go and try it. And then if you try it and you still don't like it, then cool, I'm happy with that. And then the other one, before we had our more specific guidelines, is like, we're not putting personal data into any tool, and we're never going to allow a tool to train on our data. We then started building things out properly. So I see our AI internal initiatives in 3. So enabling the team to build their own products, individual use, but then also like using tools such as like Lovable, perhaps, if they want to build apps, although I'll get to that later because I'm not a fan. Then building products for our team, and then also building products for our clients, and our clients are energy retailers in this instance. So as we looked at these 3 different areas, I wanted to set up like frameworks and enablement programs for each of the categories. So firstly, we went about having an approved tool list, and the more the merrier, but we have about 14 approved tools now, and we say, everyone, as long as it's these tools, do what you want with them, have some fun, experiment. We then had, we have a specific legal support for tooling procurement. I'm being asked a lot of security questions and legal questions I'm not sure of. So getting that specific knowledge in, or someone at least responsible for building out what that legal framework is. And then also leaning into a champion network. So utilizing those early adopters to be an extension of me as a team, and showcasing and celebrating the tangible outcomes. So rather than talking about what AI can do, taking what the early adopters have done and going, look at this really cool thing that this person's done to solve their problems at work. And then we've also set up a dedicated team, so building products for our team. Everyone will run off and start building products with these tools. They're like, it's shiny, it's amazing. Like, I built this website, and I think, well, did you actually need that website? Was that ever something that you thought of before? No. However, what we've done instead is look at the team and go, what is our problem across the organization? Where are people really struggling? And treating that discovery process like you would product development. And then trying to build something at scale using the knowledge from the team. And then finally, products for our clients. So a lot of upfront work with our clients around data handling, LLM use, trying to educate our clients actually around what is required for them, and the risk aversion we're often experiencing. If they want to get the most out of AI, then some of their red lines might need to be adjusted a little bit. But then more importantly for the team, building in the guardrails into our infrastructure so that the engineers who are using AI every day don't have to think, oh, like what's Eon's contract say about what LLM I can use? Instead, that's actually built into the functionality itself. So a couple of things we've learned along the way: team-wide use trumps individual use. I think I had this big realization over Christmas. Oh my gosh, I've been telling everyone to just use AI to like draft stuff, and it's not the right thing to do. It's not how we get the most out of people, and they need to maintain their ideas and their unique thoughts. That's what I think is most important. But a team activity and redesigning team activities is way more impactful. Using AI mindlessly isn't productive. The other one that's coming up at the moment is like humans want to be spoken to by humans rather than like a copied and paste output, and that's causing a bit of tension actually in my work at the moment. Energy retailers are not yet comfortable with the data access LLMs require, and we can get onto that a bit later. But internal adoption, removing barriers, accepting more risk on your own data will drive adoption. But no guardrails creates caution as well. So there's a fine balance there. All right, over to you, Jamie.
Go the wrong way. So hi, I'm Jamie. I have the privilege of being the data science manager in the DSO. I hope I'm not preaching to the choir at an energy event when I explain what a DSO is versus the DNO. But we'll just start with UKPN. If you're unfamiliar, our patch is the south, London and the east of England. We have about 8.5 million of the homes and businesses, and it's about 20 million people that serves. It's a big old patch. And probably the most interesting thing on here is that there are 56 generators now connected that are controllable remotely, which is 0.5 gigawatt of capacity. And this is just the beginning of what we're seeing to connect to our network in kind of new ways of thinking. And it's not a new way of thinking, by the way, like being controllable is not new, but the solution that this solves is kind of an interesting one I'm going to talk about. The DSO, like the distinction I like to make is that the DNO, which is about 6,500 people, are focused on the right now, what's happening on the network right now, where am I building today, they own the assets, they maintain them, right? So there's 6,500 people, and then the DSO, 65 people, right? So it's like a much smaller outfit. We're thinking about tomorrow, we're thinking about the longer term strategy, what opportunities are there to optimize the network tomorrow. So we're more thinking, forward thinking, and that's the main distinction that I see. But it has a role from planning the network all the way through to operating the network with things like flexibility services and better outage management and so on. I've put a couple of things in here where AI has kind of got a role. And what I mean mostly here is that first category of numbers and machine learning. Only recently we've really started to get into the more advanced, usage or the latest usage of AI. And I want to touch on that a little bit because it's a caveat that we should understand is that the distribution network is traditionally old school. It's by design. It's such an old business. It's has to adopt things that are ready rather than exciting and new. The main priority is safety and reliability of supply. And then it's customer service. And then we start looking at business efficiencies, right? So we have this pecking order that we have to maintain. And so when I started 5 years ago, I was brought in to build the first short-term forecasting system. And when I arrived, it took 2 weeks to get a laptop, and it was a Windows 7 laptop. And they said I couldn't install Python. That was only 5 years ago. But today, I have the latest tools in AI. So I'm now coding with AI. I actually did it on my way here on my phone, solved a bug on my commute, which is kind of an exciting new way of doing things, because I have access to the latest tooling. And that's just a 5-year journey for what is a sizable business. And now let's just look at a little bit of the opportunities. I did promise you that I'd talk a bit about specifics, but I guess we'll get that in the panel, because I think this to me is a diagram that illustrates kind of the opportunity that exists. On one hand, you could go and rebuild the whole network and everything would fit, but it would cost an absolute arm and a leg and no one would ever tolerate that. So we have the responsibility to do this at the right place at the right time, that's right-sized. And so if we just take this little example that we're forecasting a sunny and windy day tomorrow, we've got a solar and wind farm feeding into one substation, these little transformers. And here's what our forecast shows, is that we're going to have a little bit above the threshold tomorrow. Now that, at the moment, is a bit of a manual decision-making process. We give them a forecast, they can see it, there's a human in the loop going, okay, maybe I'll do this, this and this. But there are plenty of options that you could take to alleviate this particular constraint. And this is where I see AI having a really cool opportunity as well. How do we optimize to decide what to do with that little constrained period? And at the moment, we'll use flexibility services. In real time, they'll do switching operations to change things around. But for me, this is, if you can solve this on the day ahead, you can solve the long-term planning issue because you have a more reliable system. And so then the other element of this is well, how do you give confidence? And this is a tool that my team have built. And this is what I'm working on now, what I solved a bug on this morning with AI. And it kind of feeds into what Sam was saying about the resource of people being really valuable. Now, in the last couple of years, everyone knows who works in data that turnover is a pretty constant thing, right? People don't want to stay for 10 years off. We have some people who've worked for 40, 50 years at UKPN. It's unrealistic expectation of the data software people, right? And so this is a very complex algorithm piece of work that decides whether or not a flexible connection is going to be right for a customer. And when that person left, it was oh my God, we've got this technical debt now. All these algorithms, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of lines of code. It's now my responsibility. And this is where AI has really just alleviated everything, because now I can ask the question around the code, being hey, look, what about this? And it'll tell me where to look. I don't have to let it change everything for me, but it can really help me guide and understand what went before. And so this idea of this like kind of knowledge debt it's like a fear that's been alleviated largely by the use of AI. It's a really cool tool, by the way, but I'll talk a little bit more about how we developed that in the panel. But coming back to this as an objective, this is kind of like where I'm thinking for the future, because constraints on the network is every new connection, it's every new daily operation, and so resolving this is the big problem that I foresee in the energy sector space. So I guess I'll hand back to Marcus, and I think we'll kick off the panel, if everyone wants to come back up.
All right, invite you all up. I knew that was going to be interesting, but that was awesome. Thank you all for coming today and sharing just a few minutes of insights to get us started. So we'll have 15 minutes of questions that we've seen before, we know are coming, and a few areas we thought might be interesting to explore, and then we'll open it up to the floor in the room, and I think you can ask questions online as well. So we'll start, as a little bit of an opener, we'll start with what's one myth or misperception about AI you would like to bust? And could I start with you, Sam?
Yeah, I think you've already touched on it, but it's just so widespread that AI equals large language models is a huge one that's really important, because actually in an engineering heavy sector, there are so many opportunities that come from like machine learning and optimization type AI. So that would be maybe like the slight tweak, like AI equals large language models, and the greatest benefit from AI for the sector comes through large language models. I think both of those are misperceptions.
I feel like I'm seeing some nodding already from other panelists that have seen that one. How about yourself, Jamie? Any that you want to talk about?
Yeah, so I view it as a tool, and with every tool it needs a user, and you can unleash the tool to do things. You see, I went to Morrison's lately and had a aisle cleaner. I'm like, okay, you can unleash a tool, but it's possible. But I see a lot of content where people are like fear-mongering about it, where they're asking ChatGPT like, oh, who would you rather save, like a mosquito or like 3 people? And eventually you can make it do anything. You can make it say whatever you want to say, really. But you're misusing a tool in that sense. So I do think the kind of everything needs to be conceptualized around what is the tool designed to do. A predictive language model is just going to predict what you want to hear, right, or what it's been trained on. And you can prod the bear as much as you want and get what you want out of it eventually. And so I don't like the kind of, well, if you do this, it'll say something crazy. It's like, well, that's because that is the tool and that's what it does. So I think that's probably a misconception around this. ChatGPT is going to replace everybody. It's like, no, it's going to be in the arsenal of something to use. And that's probably where I think.
And you were starting to touch on that in your lightning talk about the use in a coding context, right? It's like, yes, you can get it to say whatever you'd like, and you're navigating it, but one thing it is really good at is navigating lots of information. In your case, the information of a code base where someone had left and there's not that person to explain it. Wait a minute, AI is pretty good at looking through a bunch of code and explaining it to help you get a grips of a code base pretty quickly. How about yourself, Ruby? Anything from your adoption lens?
I couldn't agree more actually with what Jamie's just said. I think the need for people for like new ideas and to oversee the tool and make sure that what is being generated and thinking about from a coding perspective, the code is right and aligned with like the overall picture that often AI doesn't have a view on is fundamental. So I think like a lot of the fear mongering I see in the press really infuriates me. Because it's really different to what I've experienced firsthand in terms of the need of people.
Yeah, makes sense. And it's a bit these things are nuanced, right? Part of the fear-mongering in the press is because some of the hype is misguided and conflates in one sentence a large language model versus machine learning. Like I think I've heard at conferences someone say something like, oh my God, I got an LLM to say X. Therefore my modelling forecast is going to hallucinate. It's like, no, that's a bounded error. It's a very different classification. And how about yourself from a policy perspective, Daisy? Are there anything misperceptions you're seeing at a government regulation policy level?
I guess sort of linked to that, it's the fact that there's this perception there'll be this whole new sort of category of risks that we call AI risks, and they're sort of distinct from existing risks that you have as part of delivering an essential service, a very complex service to like every customer in the country and every business. So I think just, I guess keeping in mind that it has the power to optimize risks, like I was saying, but it's not a new category of risk. We don't need to create new categories for complaints or, there's good customer service, there's bad customer service, there's cybersecurity, there's data protection. These things are all really important without AI, and AI just is a factor in, and AI can in fact help you address some of those risks as well. So it's not sort of necessarily the bad. It's not going to make those risks any worse.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that's part of the challenge, right? Is because the field moves on very quickly, and generative AI has moved on very quickly, the agentic AI, etc. You start to get to the point where you have to put a lot of effort into staying current enough to be able to appreciate and understand the risks in a sober way. And to Jamie, you were talking about like taking that to the extreme, right? You can take an LLM to the extreme and make it say something. And it's similar now in an agentic sense, I guess, in that, like, yes, there's lots of people buying GPU and hardware to be able to run with their computer and sort of give agentic AI greater access than in the past. But that's not a case that will happen in a computer at UK Power Networks in anywhere near the near future. But you can do that extreme, and you can play with it at home, and you can give it access to all your emails, and it might delete them all. It's that kind of sense.
It's another interesting misconception actually, is that you have to stay current, because when I've been on the Claude Code process for quite a while now, and every time you think, yes, I've really figured out how to do this now, I'm ahead of the game, it just gets solved. So the tech just solves what your niche was. So I don't think the future for all of us in the rooms who wants to be involved in this is to be the most current person, because actually the most useful use of AI will just become part of the toolkit because it's so good at evolving. So I think a mistake would be for us all to just abandon the extreme knowledge base of the energy sector and all these kind of, the physics and all these things that are underlying and important for a human to understand and be educated on, to then go and pursue, I'm just going to be an AI expert. Because actually, the reality is it will just catch up and serve you. And that's my experience so far, is no matter how deep I've gone down the rabbit hole, within a week, the new tool's out there that solves it. And I'm like, okay, well, I should have just waited, if I was just a bit more patient.
Yeah, and I guess it's not dissimilar when you look at the advent of cloud and how that was adopted. There was a lot of platforms at major tech companies where they were working around a feature that wasn't there yet in setting up their infrastructure platforms. And then it became available. You get things like serverless that people were inventing in their own darkroom beforehand, and so it's that mixture of sort of keeping current enough that you can adopt. But to your point, in our sector, often it's about adopting what's reliable and proven, not even being on that first curve.
Just use what's there, and you don't have to dig deep, because there's plenty. Well, you can. We need people who dig deep, and they're the ones who push it forward. But from an energy sector perspective, I will adopt what's good and reliable. And the speed at which that's rolling out is fantastic as it is, without me having to tinker with it any harder.
And I guess that builds on your point, Sam, about starting with the business problem, right? It's about energy sector domain knowledge, understanding the problems we've got, and therefore what's the right tool. Is that fair? Or?
Yeah, and I think we really do underestimate the challenge of understanding and framing the problems. And you need, I'd say, you don't need to stay on the cutting edge. You need the level of understanding of what AI is capable of to help that shape your thinking about, is this a problem that I've ignored before because it was just too hard, but now I can solve it? So that awareness is really important, but it really is the detailed understanding of what are the problems that really matter within an organization, within the sector, that is really the key lever as to whether AI can drive value.
I've been actually shifting my enablement sessions across the organisation to actually be more like problem framing and problem solving, rather than talking about AI and practicing using AI. It's like, what are your team activities? Where do you fall down? What's really difficult? If you needed to move twice as fast, what would need to be true? And then let's try and use the tools we have at hand to solve for all of those individual problems, rather than just mindlessly using and driving.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's funny about that is when you start taking that problem-orientated approach, you start realising, actually, no, AI doesn't apply here, but we haven't done X, which does apply, and the technology existed for the last 15 years. So you start to find what's the right combination of tools, to your point, Jamie, to solve the problem we've got today, that someone in the business has a burning problem. that they want to solve. I guess building on that then, are there any uses, and including naming what the technique at play was? We can use the 3 categorizations from earlier. Are there any uses, obviously Sam, you shared HeatGeek as one, are there any uses that have sort of surprised you and impressed you, and what technique did it involve?
So writing documentation is the most boring part of being a software engineer.
We've all felt that pain, essentially.
And I often get asked, so everything I build, the process is like, oh, I build something, but it needs engineering sign-off. It needs to go through the planners and everyone who understands the networking niche. And they'll often ask questions like, hey, what specifically was the algorithm went into making this decision, right? So it might be like, why was this project included or excluded, or why was this constraint associated to that project, right? They ask these quite particular questions, which have an answer. But it used to take me a while to just kind of give with absolute certainty what the answer was, where you can now just sort of, ask it. And I was very skeptical at first that it would be able to do this, largely from my experience with using like ChatGPT or whatever with the hallucinations. But now when it has these kind of specifically trained, concepts of code, and it can now start querying, like, you get history and sort of say, hey, what actually changed in the past couple of iterations? Detail that for me, document that, and being able to answer those questions and automatically create like the documentation. As long as I check it, obviously, I feel like the need to check is very, very important. But just speeding up that process, it speaks to the efficiency. Don't chase efficiencies. I tell you what, no matter how efficient I get, there's always more work to do, right? So I never feel like I'm going to automate myself out of a job, but I seem to just be taking on more and more because it can be solved faster and faster. So I don't think the stress levels have ever eased. If anything, they've ramped up. But yeah, I found that really surprising, at how good it was at documenting my stuff and drawing it out and visualizing it and helping me explain to a non-software developer how it works. So yeah, it's a really good example.
Yeah, makes sense. And that point on sort of like checking the work, right? That's where AI goes from a tool to being part of an integrated system, and you're thinking about what checks does this need given the context, and how we're going to build that into the flow so that it's not a manual thing every time. I don't know, from an AI adoption perspective, Ruby, you've got any thoughts about that, sort of like what checks and boundaries and controls that you feel like have been working for you? I know you're a year in, so maybe not at that point yet.
I think it really varies from team to team, and it's part of the integrating it into our functions and our way of working, where each team needs to define what that looks like for them. I think some of the skills that I see shifting with the use of AI is really needing to be a lot better at feedback and a lot better at being quite critical. And like for me, I found that quite a challenge. I'm quite confident in what I write, and I find reading quite boring. So that's definitely, I think, a shift for some people to be able to go, this looks great, but actually, like, what is my critical lens, and being quite forceful and on that. So, yeah, I think that's definitely a skill set that we'll probably need to build as part of the enablement.
Yep, and anyone else want to jump in on the check side of it and the control side of it? Doesn't seem like any excitement for that one, so we'll move on. Any other use cases of AI to that question I posed to Jamie that impressed you, you're excited about, then what technique did it use?
I think one that I'm excited about is something coming out of the University of Warwick called Aeolus, which is looking at how do you use reinforcement learning to optimize wind farms in the operational phase. So when you build a wind farm, you try and design it so that the wind turbines don't interfere with each other, the kind of like wakes of the wind turbines don't cause the ones behind them to lose power. And that's great at the design stage, but actually the wind blows from lots of different directions, and you can only really design it around that to some extent. What the Aeolus tool is doing is optimizing in real time using reinforcement learning the whole wind farm at once to maximize the output of the whole wind farm by steering the wind turbines together. And that's like a really complex computational problem. We couldn't have solved it with the kind of like traditional mathematical optimization techniques, whereas reinforcement learning is starting to show real fruit in that area. And one of the things that's exciting about that is, well, that could boost the output of offshore wind by 1%, 2%, 3% as the result of some software. Great, like, let's not build loads more wind. Like, if we can get that software-based improvements in power output, that's really huge. So yeah, that's one of the things that's exciting me.
Yeah, and I remember a similar story in with the wind turbine space in terms of predictive maintenance being a similar sort of like out. If you can predict in advance, you can avoid wind turbines going offline. So you start to see some of these software implementations can combine together. And I guess that speaks to your point, Jamie, at UK Power Networks, of avoiding infrastructure build because of the techniques and what we can get out of the current, what we can juice out of the current lemon, using software in the right cases applied where there's actual problems rather than just something that would be excited to jump on. Anything for you? Anything anyone else wants to add?
I was just going to say that, well, predictive maintenance is one and forecasting is another. They're pretty mature. They've been used for quite a long time now, and you see some quite big numbers coming out of that. So I think there was a NESO project on better forecasting, which led to 33% better accuracy. And one of our members, Equinor, implemented some AI tools on predictive maintenance, and it was about $120 million improvement. So these are huge numbers, and that's what government will be looking at in terms of making most of the opportunity.
Yeah, even with predictive maintenance, you often see that there are a lot of use cases that technology existed for a while, but what we were talking about earlier, sometimes it's about spotting and having the right combination of energy and technical capability to realise it. There's a lot of areas where predictive maintenance isn't being used, and it could be, and but there's a lot of hype around AI where people are getting Copilot installed and rolling that out across the business, whereas meanwhile, predictive maintenance, and you were talking about the high-skilled staff that are sort of waiting for help. Let's move on to the AI adoption side, Ruby, and obviously you gave us a really awesome intro there with your journey over the last year of trying to make adoption work. What's been hardest about trying to get AI adopted in the last year for you at Kraken?
I think there's two things. So the first one was definitely sentiment at the beginning, and a lot of emotion around AI. I think also linked to what you're saying about what is AI, and suddenly it was all generative AI, and it's like it's going to change the world. And I think there was a lot of specifically engineers who were using it already and felt like frustrated about how it was being spoken about. So a lot of the focus at the beginning was shifting the conversation to be more around tangible outcomes, and then thinking about how we're going to approach things responsibly, and thinking about the individuals who are actually doing the work. So I've really tried to champion the people using AI rather than the technology itself, and that's been really helpful. The second one that I think's been quite tough is getting to that scale point. And I found so far that we have needed engineering teams to be able to create these scale products that are going to make an impact across the organisation, and then also make an impact for our clients. So I think that's where we've been most successful in a lot of our customer service AI products that we've built. But then also internally, these successful products have been around our knowledge partner that we built out called Alfredo, feeding in specific context. And doing that at scale has required really great ML engineers, because what I've found with teams who are using, let's say, ChatGPT for enterprise, actually there's only so far that you can go, and that's been quite a surprise for me considering the conversation, and it's been quite difficult to then move from individual adoption to team-wide adoption and shared tools.
Makes sense. Does anyone have a different experience to that, or a similar one?
More from a security point of view. All right, so I mean, we're sitting on a wealth of data that should not be shared, right? It's customer data, there's GDPR data, there's commercially sensitive data. And so how do you use it in a way that's going to make sure that never gets, infringed?
Yeah, I guess it's not just the reality of the person doing it, but it's all the governance and frameworks that exist around that give you the comfort that AI adoption is happening in the way that you expect. Because I think the term that I'm seeing crop up once again, the shadow IT, right? There's the IT team that feels really good about their AI controls and process, and meanwhile there's someone over there in the business really excited that they're making something and they're shoving PII into it. And it's there's that sort of shadow IT angle of you might have a perfect process in the IT part of your business, but if that is separate to the main part of your business, then that can create a challenge.
There's an angle that I've still not overcome myself with it, so I'm putting my own barrier on something. And it's kind of when you make a decision on the network, you have to be able to defend the reasons that you took that decision and audit that process. And there is a very big temptation to just black box kind of the reasoning. And so I've not yet figured out what the best way is going to be. So if we've got, you know, the future constraint scenario that I have, and I've got all these levers available to me, each one of those levers will either benefit someone or might impact someone in a negative. Like, you know, it might be curtailment here and flexibility here, and, you know, reconfiguration there, and each one of those things will have an implication. And it's super important to be able to fully explain the decision, and that the temptation is just like, hey, look, ChatGPT, tell me what I should do. And you just, that mindlessness can kick in, and I haven't got a perfect solution for that other than making sure that every optimization is hard-coded in some sort of, you know, algorithm that we can fully audit all the time. But then that's at odds with AI reasoning, right? So
yeah, that's part of the advantage of rules-based systems that we've had for decades, right? Is that you're able to fully explain it, and now you can use AI to explain it a bit faster.
Yeah.
But then it comes down to model selection in terms of which models are more explainable, and you might take a hit on like the degree to which you can optimize for explainability.
yeah, and like the examples come thick and fast, right? Like benchmarking hurts some people more than others, and you know, you have to be explainable. And I think that's something that I find difficult with AI at the moment. It's like, how did you arrive at that conclusion? And, you know, how do you ask it that? It'll hallucinate again, or it'll invent something again. So that the audit trail is something that I think could be better.
Yeah.
And I think if I can come in there, it's particularly interesting because in an industry that often has like well-encoded processes to deal with this issue of like, how do you ensure that things are explainable and fair and transparent? Like, lots of the thinking has occurred within those processes rather than that like slightly higher level of abstraction of, well, how do we design processes and systems that deliver these outcomes? And so it's starting to stretch us kind of like as a sector of, it's not just the like, we've got AI delivery skills gap, but we have this like, hang on, the designing of processes and systems to achieve desired outcomes kind of gap. That's a much more widely, we always needed it in bits of the sector and had it in bits of the sector, but that's much, much, much more widely needed now, which is quite a challenge.
Awesome. Let's take a question from the room.
Good morning. Fascinating discussion. Really enjoying this. It's Jonathan Thirlwell, Head of Emerging Technologies at Ofgem. And it was great to hear Daisy saying about our approach being pro-innovation and the proportionate approach we're taking to risk. So great feedback. My question is around, I suppose, governance, accountability, and checks. And we were talking about having a human in the loop, and you were able to, when you were getting the AI to summarize things, you were able to check it. Now that was based, I think, by implication, that was based on you having experience there. So the question is around people coming into the workforce and how they acquire that skill set, those insights, that critical thinking. So I've just welcomed the panel's views on that.
I've recently onboarded 2 people into my team and introduced them to that complicated, the complicated software. And like, I'm hiring a software engineer, right? So like, they're already familiar with all the toolkits available. They're already AI savvy. So the actual tool usage is a requisite of the job. So then all they have to do is then learn the thing. And I don't see that as any different to any other onboarding situation. Like, they would have had to come in cold without the tools 2 years ago. And people have successfully done that. So I just see it as a speeding up of the process. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm not so concerned with the onboarding aspect. It's just easier than ever.
I can come in around like people brand new to the workplace because I think I really worry about this. I actually zooming out a little bit and thinking about societal impacts. That's where my biggest fear is around people, you know, who have just come out of university and they're looking to start out. But I did a series of interviews with junior developers and also people who are managing junior developers to say, how are you actually using AI as you start to upskill? And junior developers are actually very cautious. They were saying, I only use it to ask questions of the code base as a first step before speaking with my manager or a peer. And they are like wanting to spend 3, 4, 5 months not using it at all so that they can really understand the fundamentals of coding, so that they can have that critical view to be able to actually say this was right, this was wrong, and understand how the code should look. Managers were actually much more encouraging of people using AI early on, like similar to Jamie's point. This idea of like it's a new way of coding that they can learn from the beginning. But where we landed was actually don't use it as much until you feel really confident in yourself and being able to have your own answers, to being able to explain things, and only then can you explain a code that wasn't written by you. So I think it's really important, like for us as a business and the industry, to say give that space and allow people still to grow. I think there's this new expectations that comes with AI around efficiency and speed, and actually like being able to have space to learn, and managers really lean in even more to ask questions and be a sounding board is really fundamental at the moment.
I think there's some interesting areas in the industry, like if you take the control room, for example, it's one of those dominant spaces, and this is true of power networks and water networks and other control room types like gas and nuclear. You know, you've got an industry there where there's a lot of people that are retiring, having worked in that organisation for 30, 40, 50 years, and they're taking their tacit knowledge with them. And so that's a burning problem we've got as a reality. And it's interesting, I've seen one application of AI in the restaurant sector. You know, people talk about AI explainability, and that term can be a bit misused in a few different places. But I think one of the interesting examples there is setting up the model and approach. This in a restaurant, it was to look at scheduling. And so new restaurant turnover, staff turnover, like you were saying, in terms of data engineers, can be very high. So it was an application of AI where they were using ChatGPT to help with the explainability of the model that was there, so that a new member of staff that was junior could understand what are the dynamics and factors that have gone into making this decision. And that was a separate effort to building the tool itself. And often when you see AI done well, the tooling and the infrastructure and the controls around it is more of the effort than actually the tool, the thing you're implementing to solve a problem.
If I can just pick up on something that Ruby said earlier about the increasing importance of feedback and the ability to provide effective feedback, that's obviously quite important when interacting with AI, but I think it's also quite critical in that skills challenge. So the challenge that I would have for the sector is how are we honing and refining our ability as line managers and organizations to provide good, critical, effective feedback to the more junior staff around the use of AI, but around everything, because that's actually something, if before it's been, well, people have learnt a bit by osmosis and so on, and that model's no longer going to work, then we have to do that. Okay, we need to get better at intentionally providing effective feedback to our people.
Awesome. I'm conscious we're coming to time, but for those of you in the room that have questions, we'll be around afterwards for the next half an hour for you to catch us up and to have a conversation. And also, if you're online, you'll be able to ask questions, and we'll follow them up afterwards. But it's 10 o'clock, so I better start wrapping up. Probably been enjoying. Have we got 5 minutes?
We can go over a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a really snappy, quick question.
All right, one more question, and then I'll do wrap up. Go for it.
Hi, great panel. I'm Stephanie Cairns. I'm a senior data scientist at OVO, and I specialize in AI risk. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your experience with customer-facing AI applications. What have you found works? What doesn't? What kind of use cases and applications do you think actually drive value? Thanks.
So we have had quite a few products in this space. So email support, so being able to generate an email, thinking about the entire customer history and account, so that someone can then review it and then send to the end customer. We found really good adoption there. One of our clients is using that for 80% of their emails generated, and have found they're moving 30% more quickly. We're also then starting to we want to be able to have a bit of a co-pilot. I hate that word though, so I don't want to say it. But basically like a support at every page in the account. So we're calling something storyline. So being able to tell a story so that kind of investigation doesn't take as much time, and it's more to hand for our specialists. So that's that's what I think's worked really well so far. But I think there's loads more opportunity across customer service space.
The technology finally got good enough to make Clippy good.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I like most about Kraken is that it's helped the whole industry realise in energy that we are all technology companies now, and taking that customer-focused approach, thinking about service design from the beginning, customer-orientated. If you look at the financial services industry and what they went through with the 2008 financial crisis and the impact on trust that had and the sort of journey of that, and then all the challenger banks came in, and I remember, because we were in the room at Starling, that customer-first focus and that service design focus, it's not about adopting AI, it's about adopting any technology fast. It's about focusing your customers first and focusing on how you adopt anything quickly. Cool, so we will get into the wrap up now, but as I say, if you're in the room, please hang around afterwards and we can answer any of your questions, and if you're online, please ask your questions and we will get to them. Thank you so much to Jamie, to Daisy, to Sam, and to Ruby. Some really interesting stories of all your applied experiences, everything from the policy level to the adoption level. Really awesome to bring this group together, so I appreciate you and everyone in the room making the time. I think from the day job that I have with Power Networks and traders, I suspect that most of you are somewhere in between experimenting with AI and trying to scale it. And I think we've got lots of challenges in the sector, right? Jamie, you spoke to a few from a UK Power Networks perspective in terms of planning and connections. We just talked about customer. I talked earlier about the control room, and you think about some of the other areas of the industry like trading platforms. There's a huge amount of challenges, right? And essentially there's some sort of through line at some point where you're bringing data together into resilient systems. And yes, those systems increasingly involve some element of AI in places to make better decisions and deliver better operations. And the consistent theme that we're seeing there, and that we've talked about firsthand today, it's not that organizations in energy aren't moving on AI. They are. There's lots of excitement, there's lots of energy and movement, there's a fair amount of uncertainty and skepticism, to Ruby's point as well. But that approach we're seeing to going from experimentation to scale, we're seeing a huge range of different approaches there. And only some are successful in unlocking the connections and planning decisions you want to make, or augmenting the decisions of control room operators or traders or heat pump engineers, or in delighting customers, to the point of the question we just had. And I think often when you see that organizations aren't realizing the expected the expected ROI, or maybe the return on investment they promised the business or their manager or whoever, it's not as a result of the model or the LLM. Like Jamie said earlier, these are tools that we're using, it's in the use. So when and how can we safely use AI? Is this worth building? And do we trust our system to work reliably at scale over time? Because we've got a lot to do in the energy industry. There's a lot that rides on us, and we cannot allow the total nonsense of AI powered to dominate the conversation here. And it's what each of you are going to choose to do next, how you apply AI, where you implement it, that's going to determine whether it's this expensive distraction or it's one part of changing how you operate. AI isn't going to solve all the problems we face. You will. Everyone in this room and online that's watching, you're in this sector, you're going to be the people that solve it, and you're going to use this tool. As I say, we're all here to learn. There is going to be a feedback form afterwards. Let us know how the event was. There's some feedback forms in person at the desk there. And if you had a question we didn't have time to get to, or if you just want to share a perspective, really welcome that as well. I think we've got a slide to move on. Oh, I've got the clicker, don't I? There we go. Feel free, if you've got a question or if you want to reach out and share a perspective, you can grab my details here. There's a QR code and there's a recording if you want to grab them back. Feel free to reach out. Hopefully this is not going to be our last grounded conversation on AI. And also, there is going to be the next Energy UK breakfast briefing coming on 23rd of April. Demand better, a smarter, fairer retail market. Thank you all for your time today, and appreciate you hanging with us as we ran over and got a bit too excited.